Jai Hind, Namaste, hello and a very warm welcome to UPSC for everyone. My name is Abhinav and in this video we'll be discussing The Hindu and Indian Express for the date 16th of November 2020. Now for your convenience, I have added timestamps in the description, so if you want to skip to a particular news, please use those timestamps. Also, PDF for selected topics are available on the Telegram channel, the link to which is in the description. Also, if you like our videos, please subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon so that you don't miss out on any new videos that we post. And please give us a thumbs up if you like this video. So without wasting your time, let's get started. So starting with the Hindu, mega trade bloc RCEP takes off. Let us see. So this is the trade bloc consisting of ASEAN plus 5 being China, Japan, South Korea and Australia and New Zealand. These are the 5 countries plus ASEAN. They have signed a free trade agreement, right? Now this is historic for this area. Now this will boost commerce among the member countries and also the Asia Pacific region. And the 3 largest economy in the pact, China, Japan and South Korea, are part of the free trade agreement for the first time. And India had already walked out of this in 2019 because we did not want to have a free trade agreement with China. Now India's exit, we ended our negotiations because they were against our interests. We did not want a virtual FTA with China. We did not return to the negotiations despite requests from RCEP members. Now they're saying that if India wants to join again, then India would have to write letter of intention. We are not interested in that, so let us leave that. Now advantage China, beginning of RCEP, major development because it will not only help China but trade in Asia Pacific region in the post-COVID scenario. This means a lot for China as it will give it access to Japan and South Korea, as the 3 countries haven't yet agreed on their FTA. So now through RCEP, China would be having access to these markets. And the signing shows that the idea of decoupling from China is not substantive issue in regional sense, something that has been projected or proposed for so long, but these countries are not ready to decouple from China. So this is all about it. Now see, these are the ASEAN countries, these 10, right? Laos, Vietnam, Cambodia, Brunei, Thailand, Malaysia, Singapore, Indonesia, Brunei and Philippines, right? So this is the ASEAN region and this is the RCEP region. ASEAN plus 5, the plus 5 being China, Japan, South Korea, Australia and New Zealand. So this is Asia Pacific, right? RCEP, and this is ASEAN. Then just the headline, Soumitra Chatterjee, one of India's tallest actors, dies. So you can read all about him. Then editorial page 6, border on the boil. So this is about the increasing ceasefire violations by the Pakistanis, right? Now some points. The present situation at LOC cannot be normalized and must be taken seriously. Why? Since 2003, when we signed the ceasefire agreement, 2020 has seen the highest level of firing. Now, Pakistan's intentions, what are the intentions? Number 1, provoke India ahead of its 2-year term at UNSC, which will start from January 2021. Rake up trouble before FATF task force review in February. And naming the CPEC, Pakistan also wants to further strain the India-China relations because Pakistan has come out with a dossier saying that India is promoting and sponsoring terror attacks within Pakistan, and those are specifically targeting CPEC projects, right? Now, India's threat matrix includes the very real possibility of a 2-front situation where the army will be engaged at the LOC and LAC simultaneously, along with a possible spike in terror activity in Jammu and Kashmir. Then Suu Kyi again, some points from this as well about the political situation, the ground reality in Myanmar. So let us look at them. So number 1, the military era constitution bars Miss Suu Kyi from becoming the president. So she took the levers of power as state councillor in 2015. Now people expected her to confront the generals or pushing them to end military's organized influence, but she appeared to have bought peace with them. Now she's a realistic person and that is how she can take her country forward. So her public defense of the generals handling the operations in Rakhine state have put questions on her credentials. Now the ground reality is it is very difficult to maintain and manage situation in Myanmar. Those who support Ms. Suu Kyi say her critics outside the country do not understand the complexities of Myanmar's power dynamics, and that is true because outsiders don't have the insider's view. Even though the military has allowed free election, it made sure that its interests were preserved. The constitution itself provides a block of seats, 25% seats in the parliament are reserved for the soldier, and they would prevent any amendment to the constitution. So Ms. Suu Kyi has no option but to work with the military. The military also controls 3 key government ministries, the defense, border and home affairs. Then again, her powers are clipped. Military continued its campaign against the country's ethnic minority rebel groups despite her promise to reach out to them. All these suggest that the power struggle between the popular civilian leadership and the powerful military establishment is an ongoing reality despite the elections. So what we perceive and what the ground reality is are very different things. Miss Suki is very pragmatic and she's acting with respect to the ground realities and the powers at her disposal. So it is very easy to criticize her, but we have to understand her point of view as well. Then page 7, a recipe to tear down trade unions. So let us see what this person is saying. So he's basically first telling us about the long history of trade unions in India. Then he's criticizing the new Industrial Relations Code on the basis of its ability to deregister trade unions. So let us quickly look at it. So first he tells us that trade unions first emerged in 19th century and they came up as self-managed organizations. They gave collective voice to working people. Then all the generic points that through trade unions, workers have been able to win better wages, fairer employment conditions and whatnot. You can read all of this in the PDF. There's nothing for me to explain per se, right? Now in India, the trade unions, the formal trade union started in 1926 with the Trade Union Act that was adopted, right, in 1926. Now this law provided for registration of trade unions. Now registration facilitated their rights and also provided a framework governing their functioning. It also bounds workers' action within a legal framework. Why? Because if they don't follow this legal framework, then the trade union can be deregistered. So that was the big checking point. It gave workers the rights to take steps to press for their claims, agitate for their claims, and advance them before government and the judiciary. It also provided the members, workers, and elected officers of union a degree of immunity against the law on criminal conspiracy. So it also provides them a degree of immunity against criminal conspiracy. The law recognized that action based on collective decisions by workers were legal and did not constitute criminal conspiracy. So this is the background of the trade union movement that he's telling us. Now he starts with the criticism of the Industrial Relations Code. First of all, this code came by repealing the Trade Union Act, the Industrial Disputes Act 1947 and Industrial Employment Standing Orders Act 1946. Now the point of criticisms. So number 1, erroneously widens the grounds under which trade union may be deregistered. Now earlier they could be deregistered only for financial irregularities. Now they can be deregistered for a lot many things. And that brings us to the second point, that is there are vague definitions. He means that it does not explicitly define that what are the explicit conditions under which deregistration can take place. Rather, it follows a very generic convention that contravention by the trade union of the provision of this code will lead to deregistration. So it is a very wide area. So there could be any activity under which a trade union can be deregistered. So this shifts the balance of power completely in the favor of employers who continue to enjoy the protection under the Companies Act. Now he says that this violates the principles of equality before law of natural justice. Now since deregistering is taking place, so what happens? Deregistered unions can no longer represent the members. It is true, neither before the dispute resolution machinery or in the courts. Now, if it is illegal or deregistered, then any collective action by such a trade union would also be treated as illegal. Very true. Then the officers and the members would also lose their immunity with respect to criminal conspiracy. This is also true. Then he says that this code cuts and copy pastes from TUA the provisions of immunity, but this provision of deregistration, this wide ambit of deregistration, makes it meaningless. And finally, he says that this new code appears to be designed to deter collective action by workers' unions. So simply what he's trying to tell us is that since this new Industrial Relations Code widens the definition of deregistration, as a matter of fact, it leaves a very big gray area as to what would constitute an action under which a union can be deregistered. So it leaves a very big space for their exploitation, and also it shifts powers in favor of the employers rather than the employees. Then what would be the consequences of all of this? He says that this would lead to extra legal formations like struggle committees and worker fronts that used to be there before the Trade Union Act, right? And they would be advancing their demands against the unreasonable employers. But it would have two outcomes. Number 1, it would push the employment dispute resolution outside the legal framework, right? So it would make it illegal. And number 2, since it has pushed the dispute resolution outside legal framework, it would lead to criminalizing of working class dissent. So this is all that he has to say. You can read from the PDF. Then page 8, Formula 3 racing track getting ready in Andhra Pradesh. So this will come up at Kotapalli in Anantapur district. This will be a 3.4 kilometer track, and this will be the second F3 track after the track in Chennai and there is only one F1 track in our country, which is the Budh International Circuit in Greater Noida in Uttar Pradesh. Recognition will be sought from Federation International D All Automobile and Federation International D Motorcycling. The racing track will also be used by automobile manufacturers for testing purposes. Now, there are some technicalities with respect to the weight of a car and the speed it can have. There are specific technicalities which differentiates Formula 1 from Formula 2 to Formula 3. But Formula 3 is an important race because it sets up drivers for Formula 2 and Formula 1, right? So Formula 3 restricts the speed of racers to 250 kilometers. But this track will have all the features such as straights, high speed corners along with elevation up to 40 meters. So this is all about it. This is important for your prelims and it could also be important for your mains, the differentiation between F1, F2 and F3. Because I remember in 2011 when this Budh International Circuit was launched in India, then there was a question in mains about the color of flags and the different flags used in F1 racing. So they could be asking anything, so you better prepare yourself. Then page 9, Arunachal records best sex ratio, Manipur the worst. So let us look at it. So this is according to a 2018 report, Vital Statistics of India based on Civil Registration System, published by Registrar General of India, who is responsible for conducting census, right? Now, sex ratio at birth is the number of female born per 1,000 males. So please, such definitions you should be clear about. They are important for your PT as well as your mains. So this ratio was determined on the basis of data provided by 30 states and union territories. 6 states did not give the data, right? Now, these are the data. This is not important for the examination per se. Now, what are the important points to take away from it? Number 1, more registrations of birth are taking place in our country. The level of registration of births has increased to 89.3 in 2018 from 81.3 in 2009. The numbers you don't need to know. Now, the process of registering births and deaths, this is something interesting. So the birth or death certificate is issued by the state registrar general, right? The prescribed time limit for registration of birth or death is 21 days. Some states, however, register even after a year. Now, what is the process? If it is done within 21 days of birth or death, it is free of charge, right? If it is done between 21 to 30 days, then you have to pay a fee or a fine. Then if it is more than 30 days up to a year, then you have to take permission from the prescribed authority and you have to produce an affidavit made before a notary or any other officer authorized by state government and also pay a fee. And if you are registering after a year, then you have to get an order from magistrate of first class after verifying the correctness and on payment of prescribed fee. So this is a small, you can say, trivial knowledge for you as to how the process of registration of births and deaths take place in India. Then this one, eviction notices inhumane, say artists. So you can read the rest. I will just tell you the important points. So under the artists pool, the Union Housing and Urban Affairs Ministry through the Directorate of Estates on the recommendation of Culture Ministry allots houses to eminent artists. So you can use this for your paper 1 and also for paper 2. Initially, these houses were allotted for 3 years, but the artists were given extension over the years. The last extension expired in 2014. And now the Cabinet Committee on Accommodation has decided to regularize the allotment and waive the damage charges, right? So now the ministry has asked them to vacate the government accommodation. So the important point is just this only, that artist pool, Union Housing and Urban Affairs Ministry through Directorate of Estates on the recommendation of Culture Ministry. That is all that you really need to know about this. Then page 10, Ministry seeks feedback on draft Social Security rules. So the Union Labour and Employment Ministry has notified the draft rules on Code of Social Security. We've been discussing that in detail. Now these are just the draft rules. So once they become finalized, then we'll be discussing them. I'll just give you a quick overview. So they provide for unorganized sector, gig and platform workers. We've discussed what are gig workers, what are platform workers, what are the different conditions. Access to Social Security benefits through government portal. So the rules relate to Employees Provident Fund, Employees State Insurance Corporation, gratuity, maternity benefit, Social Security, and cess in respect of building and other construction workers, BOCW, and the construction sector is one of the largest employment generators in the country. Now they provide for Aadhaar-based registration, including self-registration by unorganized workers, gig workers, and platform workers on the central government portal. Now Aadhaar-based registration for building and other construction workers on a portal either of the center or state government or the Building and Construction Worker Welfare Board of the state. So they have this flexibility, right? Now, when a building worker migrates from one state to the other, then he shall be entitled to get benefits in the state where he is currently working, and it would be the responsibility of Building Workers Welfare Board to provide benefits to such a worker. So these are the broad contours. Let this get finalized, then we'll be discussing them in detail. Then Lancet panel seeks new task force on diabetes. So till now we know what is Lancet. It is a reputed global medical journal, right? So it has made a commission on diabetes, and the commission has said that there is possible damaging effect of SARS-CoV-2 or COVID-19 on the pancreatic islets responsible for regulating blood sugar and thereby on diabetes. So your coronavirus could worsen your diabetic condition. Now their report had some other points as well. They are just figures and data, so you can read them. They're saying prevention, early detection and regular monitoring have been outlined as the key elements in reducing growing burden of diabetes. And diabetes is a non-communicable disease, and this is part of your paper 3 GS Health. So India is facing this burden of non-communicable disease, right? We have the double burden of communicable and non-communicable. Now non-communicable disease are generally related to the middle and upper classes, right? So this SARS-CoV-2 can worsen this, plus how to prevent this or how to check this: prevention, early detection and regular monitoring. In 2019, 463 million people had diabetes worldwide, 80% from low income and middle income countries. So see, such a stark scenario, because this disease affects the middle and upper classes more, but 80% of patients are coming from low and middle income countries. Over 70% of global deaths are caused due to non-communicable diseases, because these are lifestyle diseases, including diabetes, cancer, cardiovascular and respiratory diseases. So this is all about it. Then India-US keen on training peace missions. So India is one of the biggest contributors to the UN peacekeeping forces since its inception, right? So now US does not directly provide its troops for the mission, but it provides funding. Almost 27% of the UN peacekeeping forces budget comes from the US, and it also provides training. So India and US were providing training for African sector. Now they are keen to extend this to the Asian countries as well, right? So this is all that is saying. I've also added something about the UN peacekeeping forces in the PDF. You can read from the PDF and download from my Telegram channel. So India and US are looking forward to undertake training of military personnel for the missions from Southeast Asian countries on the lines of ongoing initiative for African countries. India has been one of the top contributors, fifth largest, these many personnel in 8 countries. US has never contributed ground troops, but 27% of budget. In 2016, we jointly launched an annual initiative, UN Peacekeeping Force for African partners. Now the US is keen on similar initiative in Southeast Asian nations. Increasing Chinese participation. So China has been significantly expanding its troop contribution, over 2,500 troops in various missions, and committed another 8,000 as standby. Once this gets implemented, it would be the largest provider. China contributes 12% to the UN regular general budget and 15% to peacekeeping budget. India's contribution to regular budget is 0.83 and 0.16 for peacekeeping budget. So see, there's a stark difference, and that is why China is dominating different organizations within the UN like WHO, right? This is the main cause. Funding is everything, right? Now it also tells about the history of India at UN peacekeeping forces. We have participated in 51 missions in all, and we have contributed over 2 lakh personnel. We have deployed our troops in Lebanon, Golan Heights and all the major conflict areas. We've also built field hospitals, right? So this is also telling us about our history there. Then what is peacekeeping and what is its significance? So it is a joint effort between Department of Peace Operations and Department of Operational Support of the UN, right? Every mission is authorized by the Security Council. Financial resources are collective responsibility of UN member states. Each member state is legally obligated. Please pay attention. Each member state is legally obligated to pay their respective share for peacekeeping. Now composition, these peacekeeping forces are called blue berets. If you see the picture, they are wearing blue caps, blue berets or blue helmets, right? And can include soldiers, police officers and civilian personnel. Forces are contributed by member states on a voluntary basis. So please also pay attention. Forces, voluntary basis, then financial resources, obligated. Mission authorized by the Security Council. Civilian staff of peace operations are international civil servants recruited and deployed by the UN Secretariat. Features, they help in rebuilding and forming peace in conflict-torn countries. It has unique strengths including legitimacy, burden sharing and whatnot. You can read that. Now it is guided by three basic principles. Number one is consent of parties, that wherever the forces are being deployed, the parties involved should be consenting to that. Number two, they have to be impartial. UN peacekeeping forces would not be taking sides. And number three, non-use of force. Unless and until it is about self-defense or defense of the mandate, they would not be using any force. Then this one, accused can get bail if probe is not over in time. So this is for your paper 2, personal liberty and protection against arbitrary detention. So you can use it for that, right? And it is also very important for those among you who are unfortunately on the wrong side of the law. So let us see. So the Supreme Court in a judgment held that an accused, irrespective of the merits of the cases against him, should be granted default or compulsive bail. So Supreme Court has said it repeatedly that bail is the norm and detention or jail is the exception, right? So Supreme Court has always reiterated this fact. If the investigation agency does not complete the probe within a prescribed time period, so if in a prescribed time period the investigative agency does not complete the probe, then you are free to go. You are entitled to a mandatory bail. This is under section 167 clause 2 of the CRPC, which has an indefeasible right to default bail under section 167 clause 2 if the probe agency failed to complete the investigation on time. If someone is detained in custody for a case for which punishment is death, life imprisonment or sentence of over 10 years, then he can be in a custody for maximum of 90 days, right? And 60 days of detention for any other cases. So this is the time period within which the investigative agency has to complete its investigation. 90 days for any case which attracts the punishment of death, life imprisonment or sentence over 10 years and 60 days in other offense. These time limits were set to ensure the agencies do not use the rules of ongoing probe to keep people behind bars indefinitely. So this is also important for your personal liberty. Magistrates have to mandatorily inform the accused, especially those from the poor sections, of their statutory right to apply for default bail, because there have been cases that people from the poor sections, they are unaware of the laws and they languish in jails for petty crimes. And more often than not, they spend more time in jail in the pre-trial stage or the trial stage than what the actual punishment would have been. For example, they are accused of a crime for which the maximum punishment is 5 years, but they have spent more than 6 years in the jail as an under trial. So now Supreme Court has again said that bail is a rule and jail is an exception. Then page 13, 25,000 Ethiopians flee Sudan. So this problem of Ethiopia and Sudan is getting more and more complex by the day. Let it get more settled, then we'll be discussing it in brief. Then Gilgit-Baltistan Assembly poll concludes, counting begins. So this is very, very important. We've discussed Gilgit-Baltistan in 5-6 videos. Then UAE to widen golden visa eligibility criteria. This is not related to your exam per se, but if you want, you can read it. Now starting with the Indian Express front page. Punjab rail blockade poses a challenge for army getting winter supplies to J&K. So the farmers have been agitating and they have blocked railways there. So this is creating a problem. Then you please read about him from older Apu to Sunny Feluda. If you remember, we also discussed about Feluda test kit for COVID, right? Developed by IIT. So you can read this. Then page 5, deemed forests, Supreme Court not weighted. BSY considers releasing 67% of it. So here the only important point for you to know is what is a deemed forest. Now there is a Forest Conservation Act which defines a deemed forest. The Supreme Court has been monitoring the enforcement of the Forest Act since its intervention in the landmark TN Godavaram Thirumupalat versus Union of India 1995. So this is the important case, TN Godavaram, and Supreme Court has been directly managing or monitoring the enforcement of the Forest Act, right? Now what is a deemed forest? Deemed forest was a land with the characteristics of a forest and fitting the dictionary meaning of one, irrespective of ownership. In other words, these are thickly wooded areas recommended to be taken over by government for preservation of forests but not notified. So they are deemed to be, like the deemed to be universities, they are deemed forests. Now what is the problem? That people's representatives from regions like Western Ghats, if you remember 3 days back or 4 days back, we discussed a small news about farmers from Kerala also asking for removal of eco-sensitive area notification, right? Under Kasturi Rangan panel. We will be discussing that once it becomes a final report, right? So they have a problem. Why? Because once an area is described as ecologically sensitive area or a deemed forest or a reserved forest, then farmers' activities are hampered and their livelihoods are hampered, right? So they have often pushed for reclassification of these deemed forests, claiming that many forests have been affected because of the move. So basically what is happening, that in Karnataka, the BS Yedurappa government is trying to denotify 6.64 lakh hectares of 9.94 lakh hectares of deemed forest. So here the only important points for you to know is number 1, Forest Conservation Act, number 2, the definition of deemed forest, and number 3, this TN Godavaram case, under which the Supreme Court has been directly monitoring the enforcement of Forest Act, right? And what is the point of contention? That farmers are basically opposing to it because it affects their farm area and livelihoods. Then page number 8, WHO and CDC, US CDC, Center for Disease Control report, India among 6 countries with highest tally of infants who didn't get measles vaccine. So even though measles is covered in our universal immunization program, Mission Indradhanush, if you remembered, 9 vaccines plus 3 for sensitive areas, we've discussed that, right? But because of this COVID, the immunization process of measles and other diseases has taken a back foot, right? And it was halted for some period and then it was resumed. So now the report has said that India is among the 6 countries, right, where the vaccination process has been missing. So India was among the 6 countries with the highest number of infants who had not received the vaccine against measles, while the contagious viral disease surged worldwide in 2019, reaching the highest number of reported cases. A total of 1.2 million children did not receive the first dose of measles containing vaccine MC1. So there are 2 doses for measles vaccine, MC1 and MC2. So a total of 1.2 million have not even received MC1. Now some important points titled Progress Towards Regional Measles Elimination Worldwide 2000 and 2019. Now this is the important point, that to control measles and prevent outbreaks and deaths, vaccination coverage rates with required MC1 and MC2 must reach 95%. So again, for measles, vaccination is 2 doses, MC1 first and MC2 2, and it should reach 95% for controlling measles outbreak, right? So now MC1 coverage has been stagnant globally over a decade at between 85 to 84%, and MC2 coverage has been steadily increasing but is at 71%. So required for both is 95, but MC1 is hovering around 84 to 85 and MC2 at 71. Vaccination coverage against measles remain well below 95% or higher needed with both doses to control measles and prevent outbreaks. So this is all about it. Then page 10, editorial. So this is again a prophetic kind, but some important points. So how to end pollution. So first of all, very interesting study. According to a comprehensive study by Chandra Venkatraman of IIT Mumbai and other scientists, the biggest sources nationally are cooking fires, coal-fired power plants, various industries, crop residue burning, and construction and road dust. So he's basically saying that this crop residue burning and firecrackers, they are seasonal, but pollution levels are persistently high throughout our country and throughout a year. So what are the causes? Number 1 being the cooking fires, then coal fuel power plants, then industries, then these residue and construction and road dust. Now he says to counter that, we need to change the technology. For example, cooking fires has to be replaced with cleaner fuels like LPG. Coal fired power plants should be replaced with renewable energy, right? So this is what he's telling, right? Now we know what should be done, but why it is not being done. So he says the problem is that investments in all these technological changes, although hugely beneficial for the country as a whole, are often not privately profitable at present. So private sector is lacking the motivation to invest in them, and that is why they are lacking. So the good news is that government can make clean investments more profitable and dirty investments less profitable. All that needs to be done is to tax polluting activities and subsidize clean investment. For example, polluter pays principle. More polluting cars, more polluting industries and activities should be highly fined, and cleaner investments like renewable cars, renewable energy, they should be highly subsidized. Yes, in the short term, they would lead to economic loss, but in the long term, that would lead to economic gain. Then he says that judiciary is though powerful, but it does not have the technical competence and is not scientific to deal with this problem of pollution, right? And it is true, Supreme Court only comes in or steps in when there are emergency provisions like the extremely high amount of pollution in North India, especially during this period, right? But Supreme Court cannot regularly do that. So now he is talking about an independent regulatory agency which would be going for all this regulation of pollution, imposing fines, giving subsidies, making rules and laws, right? So he says that there are, apart from other advantages, these independent agencies could have the advantage in the terms that politicians can clearly wash their hands off of them, because it would be the independent agency that would be making rules. So politicians can say that we are not making these rules, tough measures. And number two, when they impose fines, they would also attract some revenue for the government. So this is what he is basically trying to say within this editorial. Then page 11, reining in the big five. So we've been discussing about these big five and the regulatory pressures that are being mounted on them. We've discussed how antitrust campaigns and actions have been initiated against Google in India and also in the US, right? So this editorial is about that only, some important points, but you should read it. So first of all, it is telling us about the case in 1998, which again the Department of Justice in the US initiated against Microsoft. Now then again, Microsoft was guilty of misusing its dominant position in the market, and it basically took out and destroyed its competitor Netscape. So Microsoft forced all the hardware makers to use mandatorily its own software and not Netscape. So that is how it destroyed it. But then Department of Justice threatened Microsoft into breaking it into many small companies, and that is when Microsoft backed off, and that is the period around which Bill Gates also moved away from active management of Microsoft, right? So this is about it. Then again, he's talking about the Google case. We've been discussing time and again, how Google is forcing the mobile makers, including Apple, paying them to pre-install their proprietary search engine on the devices, right? To maintain its dominance in the search engine market. And they have 90% dominance in that market, right? And then these big companies, they also go for regular acquisition of startups and any threats, right? So this is what it's telling. Then it is also telling that 2 years ago, European Commission fined Google a whopping $5 billion for abusing its market power. Again, this was related to its mandatory pre-installation of search engine platform on the Android mobiles, right? So it basically took away choice from both the consumers and also from the mobile makers. So for that, it was fined, right? Then this editorial tells us that why for 20 years, there has been no antitrust action against these US tech giants, right? So there are two big reasons. Number one, they say that there is a perceived notion within US that US also has to rise to technological supremacy because it is having a battle with China, especially in the field of artificial intelligence. And to attain that supremacy, they need to let go of these big five tech companies, to basically let go of them and do whatever they want so that they could gain their potential in AI. So that is the first reason. Then the second reason is that free market model. They are basically following the Chicago Doctrine, which favors free market more than antitrust. So that has been the major economic theory that has been prevalent in the Western countries. And because of that, they were not checking these big companies. So basically two reasons. Number one, competition with China for technological supremacy, especially AI. And number two, this Chicago Doctrine. You don't have to get into it, right? Now, some interesting facts about these big five, that if these big five were a country, their combined market capitalization would make them the third largest country in the world in terms of GDP. So see that much money and power they have. They also have excessive free cash flows. Because of that, they basically go on a spree of acquisition of startups and they stifle any form of competition. According to the European Commission, in 2017, the big five spent a total of 31.6 billion on acquisition of startups. Over the period of 2001 to 18, very interesting, Google alone bought one firm a month. See, and Apple buys a company every 2 to 3 weeks. So they are basically buying the new and upcoming startups with technological innovation, and they're basically going for conglomerization and cartelization, which will be a very, very big problem because we would have just 5 big techs and everybody would be having a defined domain. And if you really look at it, Google and Apple, they never compete with each other. Apple has established itself as a hardware maker, right? And its own iOS system or the Mac OS system, which is basically for its own devices only, right? But it never gets into search engine and other activities in which Google is heavily invested, right? And if you look at Google phones, they are just there to give us a facade that Google is giving a competition to Apple, which is not the true, right? So these companies are having a sort of a cartelization. They are respecting each other's domains and they are also going for conglomerization, that is acquiring hostile companies and the upcoming startups that could challenge them in future, right? Now they are saying that antitrust action can reduce the exercise of market power and potentially improve the welfare impact. Now they are giving their own opinion now that they are saying that if you break these companies, then they could again grow into something big. So a better approach would be that you should basically go for better regulation and heavy fines rather than breaking these companies. And any case for or against the antitrust action should be built on powerful intellectual evidence rather than on ideology. So this is all that is saying, but these are some important points. Number one, the DOJ case, how Microsoft misuses power, how Google used it, then how European Commission challenged it and fined it for 5 billion. Then the practice of cartelization and conglomerization by these big five, and why US did not check them for 20 years. Number one, competition with China, and number two, Chicago doctrine of laissez-faire. So this is very, very important, right? Then just the small news, Israel advances in sensitive East Jerusalem settlement. So though Israel has been signing pacts with different Arabic countries, and at the same time, they have also been increasing their occupation of the proclaimed land by the Palestinians, right? So there's nothing for me to tell you here, just you can read it. Then this one, draft rules on code on social security release, we've already discussed. Norms allowing Indian companies to list on select foreign browsers to be notified soon. So let it come out, then we'll discuss it. So folks, that is all for this video. Thank you for watching. If you like our videos, please subscribe to our channel. Also press the bell icon so that you don't miss out on any new videos. And please give us a thumbs up if you liked our videos. Also, connect with us on our Instagram page, UPSC for Everyone. And please connect with us on our Telegram page where you can access the PDFs of the videos that I'll be posting daily, right? So see you next time. Till then, stay happy, stay safe, and have a great day. Namaste and Jai Hind.